what is Bharat, for instance? Bharat, there are so many stories. One of the most popular one is about the King Bharat. But my story is slightly different, or the story which I'm most fascinated about. And that story is Bharat coming from two Sanskrit words, Bha and Rat. So Bha is absorber and Rat is light or wisdom.
We pride ourselves in this country on our Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb. So for every Bhimsen Joshi, we have a Zakir Hussain. For every Rabindranath Tagore, we will also be tremendously mesmerized by a Mirza Ghalib. But you have to ask yourself, why did that Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb not take root in Pakistan? After all, we were the same land. Why did it not take root in Bangladesh? And you will have the answer. It is Dharma, it is Sanatan.
The amount of information that we have on China is minimal. We have the least amount of researchers. We know nothing about the functioning of the Politburo as well as the languages, whereas the Chinese CPC members who are focusing on India are fluent in Hindi. Good evening and namaskar, everyone. I hope you can hear me. This is on. It really is a pleasure to be here amongst all of you today and to be given the opportunity to moderate such an exceptional panel. I think this is clearly a testimony to Utpal's popularity. When I was asked to moderate this panel, I had a very hectic travel schedule. But when a journalist as experienced and well-respected asks you to be a part of this discussion, I think it's evident by the audience that I see here today that you fight through the long weekend traffic, the cold Delhi winters, and you make sure you show up. I had an opportunity to read this very interesting book, and one of the first things that struck me was Utpal's writing style. It has this exceptional ability to be able to put together his, investigative journalistic style, a very easy way of writing, combined with academic rigor. This is the kind of writing that we aspire to achieve some time in our lives. But this book, Bharat Rising, Dharma, Democracy and Diplomacy, seeks to look into what the new model of governance that we've seen emerge in the last decade or so. This new model of governance that has replaced what was seen as a Nehruvian model of governance. And it seems to be representative of the civilizational history as well as the aspirations of Bharat. Bharat Rising, I found, takes a look at the new political climate change, the new India that has seemed to have recovered from its colonial hangover, yet it grapples with the fault lines that have always existed. It also fights these forces inimical to, the rise of Bharat. And it does all of this while having the ambitions of being Vishwaguru. But I think why this is a really important book for all of us to read is because it is an exceptional treatise of what was, what is, and what should be. So without much ado, that was my opinion, I take my first question straight to Utpal. Utpal, you've called this book Bharat Rising. Tell us what this book is all about. And also tell us, was there a particular reason that you use Bharat and not India?
Thank you, Rami. It was really generous of you. First of all, let me thank the wonderful audience. I'm so grateful that you all have come. I'm truly indebted. Coming to a question, Rami, it's 10 years of Modi government, and it has done despite challenges, from say China to COVID, from Ukraine to Gaza, has done exceptionally well. I mean, still, when you see the narrative, dominant global narrative, the narrative will be that things are not good. Uh, India is maybe in the throes of authoritarianism. Uh, Secularism is sliding. Liberalism is shrinking. Minorities are threatened, uh, which is absolutely bunkum, I should say, because when you go around, you see the world, you meet people. That's not what the feeling is. So the book tries to look into that aspect, try to correct that distortion in the narrative about New India. 10 years, it's a work in progress, no doubt, but it's quite a decent work that happened last 10 years, and we should cherish it. We should talk about this, and we should work to take it forward from here. It's a good landing position from where we can take off. So that's why, just to correct that narrative, one of the reason why I chose to write the book. Uh, Coming to your question about Bharat, I should frankly, first and foremost, say that I have nothing against the term India. Because, in fact, it will be wrong. It will be this thing that after investing so much in the Make in India, this thing we discard it completely. So we shouldn't do it. But yeah, on a personal level, if you ask me, I like Bharat. And I have a reason for that. But, that term connects me to my roots, to my civilizational roots. What is Bharat, for instance? Bharat, there are so many stories. One of the most popular one is about the King Bharat. But my story is slightly different, or the story which I'm most fascinated about. And that story is Bharat coming from two Sanskrit words, Bha and Rat. So Bha is absorber and Rat is light or wisdom. So this landmass is the absorber of light and wisdom. I don't think there can be any better word to actually, talk about this, Nathan. Yeah. So that's the reason for me. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great reason. I think it's so personal to you. But, before we start, I'd like to say this book is divided into two parts, Dharma and Democracy and Diplomacy. So I'll conduct this panel in two rounds. So we'll take the questions and, we'll ask our panelists to speak about Dharma and Democracy first, and then Democracy and Diplomacy will be the second round. So, Sir, Mr. De Broglie, Sir, the 22nd, Monday, is a very important day, obviously. We know it's, the Pran Pratishthan at Ram Mandir. What do you make of it, sir? Do you think, like Utpal says in his book, that this is a historical awakening? Is this really representative of that? Also, does the road, because Utpal also talks about Kashi, so does the road to Ayodhya and Kashi go via Mathura as well?
Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Why should you read this book? Several of us are authors, and when we write books, depending on the publisher, once we have handed over the manuscript, it can take anything up to 2 years for a book to be published. This book is very, very contemporary, and therefore my congratulations to the author as well as the publisher. It is remarkable how contemporary it is. This may be Utpal's first book. Utpal writes a lot, and more importantly, Utpal reads a lot. On the writings of several people whose names you may have heard of, but you will not have the time or the inclination to read. So yes, this is Utpal's book, but it is amazing the extent to which he draws on the arguments and the counter-arguments of various writers and puts them across to you in easily digestible form. Bharat Rising. There is a statement, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, in Utpal's book, which said that India may have won political freedom, became independent in 1947. It obtained economic freedom in 1991 with the reforms. That's partly true. But if you look back at the 1991 economic reforms, in 1991, all that happened were changes at the border, including FDI, tariffs, including export subsidies, including the exchange rates. Other than that, it was industrial delicensing. Of course, incrementally, we have added to those reforms over time. And although this assertion is true that 1991 was the trigger, in what has happened in the last 10 years, in what has happened in terms of economic empowerment, in terms of what has happened in the provision of basic necessities, in terms of what has happened in ensuring that people are empowered, and one therefore ensures that there is physical connectivity, social connectivity, one no longer needs doles, one can argue that the true manifestation of this economic freedom has begun to manifest itself only now. Having said that, Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister today. It's his second term. In all probability, there's going to be a third term. We do not know how posterity will write about this period. Whichever way posterity writes about this period, I think the conclusion is undeniable that this will mark a great threshold. It has turned several traditional things topsy-turvy. Things that particularly appeal to the younger generation who have question marks about interpreting what those three words in the preamble to the Constitution mean: socialism, secularism, and democracy. In very large measure, Utpal's book is addressed to this younger generation. The moderator asked a question about the 22nd of January, and coincidentally, the first chapter is titled Ayodhya to Kashi. Some part of the arguments in the book are economic, but some parts of the arguments in the book transcend the economic, because the edifice of Bharatvarsha is dharma, not in the narrow sense of religion, but in the sense of something that holds up the fabric of society. And one part of that book is about the dharma. A substantive section in the book is about the much maligned, rightly so, Lutyens media and how it has reacted to the phenomenon of a Bharat rising, and secondly, to the phenomenon of Narendra Modi. So there is a great deal about how various commentators have wrongly tried to malign India and are finding it very difficult to reconcile themselves to what is going on in India, the phenomenon of Bharat rising. Media does not mean only the domestic, it also means the external. And one can convincingly argue that the external commentary is unnecessarily uncharitable about what is happening in India. The last part of the book is on diplomacy. It is on India's handling of relationships with specific countries, particularly the United States, China, Japan, and of course our unfortunate neighbor Pakistan. If you were to write a book titled Bharat Rising. It's such a broad canvas that the listing of the chapters is bound to be subjective. What do you include and what do you exclude? Quite naturally, Utpal has chosen some chapters for focus. I hope all of you, particularly the young, read it. I hope all of you learn from it. I hope all of you debate the issues. And I hope all of you read further volumes, write further volumes in the Bharat Rising series, because after all, there is a narrative about India rising. Several books are being written now increasingly on that narrative, and this is a very, very welcome addition to that corpus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. De Broglie. Utpal, let me come back to you. You know, obviously, sir has spoken a lot about the transformations that have taken place, and you've chosen and picked certain topics that are of particular interest to you. You've also spoken of largely of liberation of temples. Could you explain why you think that's so important? One, what is the obsession of political parties in wanting to control? And number three, let me play devil's advocate and ask you. The country has also struggled, our society, civilization has struggled to keep temples open for all sections of society. How do we ensure that if our temples have other than government control?
So Hindu temples are not just about rituals and puja. It's actually, it's actually talks about, it deals with the entire Hindu society. It's all facet of it, whether it's culture, it's crafts, it's even economic aspects of it. If you see temple management, then you need to deal with that. In fact, in Chola time, they used to even look after they used to create storage of water and everything for agriculture. So temples were part of the Hindu society. The reason why I believe that temples should be left alone is that if you curb it, if you take away its freedom, liberation, then you are also somehow subjugating the Hindu society in some way. From growing up, I'm one person who believes that the reason why temples, for instance, was attacked in medieval times and after also was not just about wealth. Some of our eminent historians would tell. It was primarily because that was a symbol of Hindu society. Just like Brahmins were symbols of, or main symbol of Hindu religion and civilization. So the thing is about that. My larger fundamental problem with the issue is that what has the secular state to do with temples? And why is being so graceful just about Hindu temples? When the religious institutions of other religious communities are left alone, they can run the way they want to. What is exactly pushing the state to do that? And here I remember one line from Shai Deepak's book, Bharat, that is India, where he says that maybe part of the current government's feeling coloniality has come into the Indian government also, where they feel that Hindus maybe can't run their own state, their own institutions, while other religions can do that. So I think we need to get rid of that coloniality part. Coming to your thing about where you say that how do we see the problem with the thing. I know that there have been problems. Certain sections might have been excluded from that, but that can't be the excuse to just completely shut that thing up and let the society grow up. And that problem has been there with all societies and all communities. You just need to find out about that. So why just cherry picking just one community about that? And society grows, society evolves, degenerates also. I think it will find its own way in that way, I believe.
I was actually coming to you, sir, on this. What is your take on Hindu temples? Also, we've seen with Ayodhya that now, if not the government, there are, the temple committees that are managing their own temples. So what would your take be, sir?
Well, You asked me earlier about Ayodhya also, but this is a panel discussion on the book, so I will stick to the book. Cliched quote, Jawaharlal Nehru, the public sector, they are like the temples of modern India. I'm certain most people here have read it. I'm certain most people here have quoted it. Have you ever bothered to check what Jawaharlal Nehru originally said when he was inaugurating Bhakra Nangal? He did not say temples alone. He said temples, churches, and masjids. We forget the masjids, we forget the churches, because the temples appeal to us, because after all, Hinduism happens to be the dharma followed by the majority of Bharatvarsha's citizens. Utpal is quite right that historically, temples did several other things also. They were the centers of delivering education. They were centers for developing health infrastructure. They were centers for urban planning and urban governance, both brownfield and greenfield cities. It's also a fact that while we don't have exact figures, religious tourism down the years and even now has been fairly significant in India. The reason I wanted to butt in, despite saying that I would not speak in a second round, is because Utpal did not directly mention an argument that is there in his book. He indirectly alluded to it, he did not directly mention it. And that argument is that in a secular country, the definition of secular being that public policy must be de-linked from religion. I should not discriminate in public policy between different religions. There are countless examples to illustrate that even in the Constitution, we are not secular because we do discriminate amongst religions, including the Uniform Civil Code, which I'm bringing in because Utpal does mention it. But we also discriminate in the way we deal with temples and control temples as state compared to the way we treat the other religions. And I thought I should mention this argument. It's not my argument. I may happen to agree with it. It's Utpal's argument.
Thank you, sir, very much. Ashwini, I wanted to come to you next. Mr. De Broglie also mentioned how this book is largely towards the new generation, and things have transformed, and they must read it. And this new found civilizational pride that we have is appealing to the new generation. Why do you think this is happening? Is it because of a change in political dispensation? Is it political will? Is it a systematic social change?
No, I think to a very great extent it is driven. But I'm glad that it is driven, because at the end of the day, if we really think back, there has always been a struggle of civilizations. And frankly, in the scheme of things, pagan civilizations could not stand the onslaught of Abrahamic ones. I mean, let's face it, today, go to Egypt and where is Ra and Osiris? Or where is the Zeus and the Greek gods like Athena? Go to South America and where are the Incan and Mayan deities? Go to Africa, Australia, and you're wondering where are the Aboriginal faith systems gone? All of Zoroastrianism was driven out of Iran. So the truth of the matter is that the systems which talk about many truths could not withstand those systems which talk about one truth. And in that sense, the Abrahamic thought was a singular truth for a plural world. And now what it feels to me is that I am proud that I am part of a pre-Bronze Age civilization that lives to tell the tale. How many places do you have that? The difference, Rami, is that in the last 10 years, we are no longer ashamed of saying it. That at the end of the day, there is something. Why was it, I wonder, that why was it that the word secular was not part of our preamble? And why is it that it came in the emergency years, much, much later? And the truth of the matter is that if you really think about Sanatan, then Sanatan is all embracing. Whether you believe in Shiva or Shakti or Bhakti, you call a shivling a stone and I call a stone a shivling. Our path could be yantra, tantra, mantra. Each one of us could be working in a totally different way. You could be astic, tantric, nastic, or simply fantastic. But the point is that each one of us has our own path. We can have 300 versions of the Ramayana, and your version of the Ramayana does not negate mine. So that is the intrinsic pluralism of Sanatan. And that is where I believe that by consciously playing it down, we have somehow or the other in the last 70 years built up this context that, hey, listen, we are India because of the fact that we are secular, but we have played down the notion that we are secular because of our Hinduness.
Absolutely.
That has been completely played down. We pride ourselves in this country on our Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb. So for every Bhimsen Joshi, we have a Zakir Hussain. For every Rabindranath Tagore, we will also be tremendously mesmerized by a Mirza Ghalib. But you have to ask yourself, why did that Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb not take root in Pakistan? After all, we were the same land. Why did it not take root in Bangladesh? And you will have the answer. It is Dharma, it is Sanatan. And that is where Utpal has gone with this book.
Mr. Sanghi, I could not have, expected a more wholesome response to my question, so thank you. But you mentioned paganism, and I have a small snippet on paganism. We love to hate Herbert Hope Risley, for all the divisions he's caused, but he made a comparison between Hinduism and paganism, and he said the reason that paganism never survived, and we have this idea of comparing paganism to Hinduism, which is completely wrong, because Hinduism had scriptural and spiritual foundations. And he gave this example. He said, you could go to an illiterate farmer and ask him about deep, complex philosophical questions on death and life, and he'd be able to answer it with more scriptural and philosophical foundations than a pagan ever would. But having said my piece, I'd like to come back to Utpal. Utpal, you've also had a scathing commentary on Nehru in your book. You've spoken about a lot of aspects of that. Also spoken about the attack towards, what they consider as this new emerging political regime is an attack on democracy. Why have you had this scathing review? What has driven you to it, and what are the factors that encompass it?
Thank you, Rami. I'm not the one who, I don't believe that Nehru was not a Democrat. He definitely was. I'll also not dare to compare him with, say, Stalin or Mao. And he definitely loved this country. So there's no doubt in my mind about that. He loved this country. He had his love. But he had a flawed personality. I have a problem with that. I mean, we shouldn't be, the problem with this, we see in black and white. We don't have to, The thing is, he did certain things which didn't work for us, and we should accept it. The first thing we have to accept the thing, then only we can correct that part. The problem is that we don't do about that, And a part of the problem, especially after 2014, is that suddenly, there is a narrative where we try to deify Nehru just because you want to villainize Modi. So there is this entire narrative goes around that. So you say that okay, since 2014 things are not going well, minorities are attacked. It was not the case in 1950s. It was so good. It's a golden era in 50s. So my book also talks about that, and that was not the case. And that's where I go into that. Uh, for instance, if a noted lyricist gets jailed for 2 years just because he likened Modi with Hitler, now that's not sign of a Democrat for sure. Majid Sultanpuri was in jail for 2 years just for doing that. I don't think this happened after 2014. And I'm not defending Modi government here, but I'm just saying that let's be honest about that part. Or what he did with press freedom. And you go through the entire debate. There are many people who we today try to call them as fascists. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, for instance, on First Amendment, he defended press. He was viscerally against what Nehru was doing. So what he did about press freedom, for instance, it was not good. We have to say that. Or for instance, democratically elected government in Kerala thrown out just. I know people say that it was primarily because of his daughter Indira, but still, Prime Minister will have to take the blame for that. So these kind of things we have to accept, or the mistakes which he had done. The problem now is that we have to defend him because we have to attack somebody else. That is the problem. That's where I try to go around, and I wanted to say that okay, you have problem with today's government. You believe that things are sliding down. Democracy is not working well, but don't look back. Maybe try to improve it. And my thing is that, and with facts and figures and examples also I try to give us that we have been improving as a democracy. It's not the other way around. So that's where I have been critical of Nehru.
Mr. Sanghvi, let me ask you a follow-up question to this. Utpal also talks about democratization and decolonization of the Lutyens, Delhi. Do you think the rage that we get today, that we see today, is because of that? Or are they using it as an excuse?
You're putting me in a spot, no?
Of course.
Wonderful, great. I think to a certain extent that with every, lack of a better word, regime, there are always going to be the insiders. And there are always going to be those who are looking from the outside inside. So I wondered as to what is the new shape of Lutyens going to be 10 years from now. We have to ask ourselves this question, because the erstwhile insiders have become outsiders, and the erstwhile outsiders seem to be becoming insiders. But obviously the equations will change, right? So I think let's not go there. I think what I definitely see, and this is where it relates to Utpal's book, that the Overton window has shifted in terms of what we can discuss, what we can be open about, what we can say, what we can't say. I mean, frankly, and I think to a very great extent, a lot of it is to do with Modi ji, because I mean, whether it is Ayodhya Mandir, Ram Mandir, whether it is the Kashi Vishwanath corridor, whether it is the Mahakal corridor, or even look at a project like, let's say, Namami Gange, or you see the choice of gifts that he gives to foreign dignitaries.
Right.
Again, playing up on the cultural bit. And for heaven's sake, I till the time that Modi ji came up with the notion that we will celebrate Veer Bal Divas, how many of us knew what had happened to the children of Guru Gobind Singh? So the point is that he is using every opportunity to bring elements of our culture, elements of our history, and it's almost like a 24/7 effort on his part. And I believe that that is going to yield very important results, because I grew up in a generation where I was part of the South Bombay Western elite. I went to Yale University, for heaven's sake, studied at Cathedral School. I did Bible study, right? So, I mean, I come from that background where it was fashionable to say, why do you need a mandir? Put a hospital, no? But the point I'm making is that today that transformation is happening. And a lot of it is to do with the fact that A, I think people are in general fed up with political correctness. And B, I think Modi ji wears that lack of political correctness in some ways on his sleeve.
There's that kind of honesty. It also reminds me of my time in the Northeast, which started 15 years ago. I'd have South Delhi girl, educated in England, came back, went to the Northeast, insurgent-ridden area. People would ask me, what do you eat there? You might get eaten there. And that sort of psychological and geographical gap has been bridged by, Mr. Modi and no one else. But now I want to come to the round two of this discussion, sir, democracy and diplomacy. And Ambassador Sybil, the first question I want to ask you. Utpal very interestingly calls diplomacy today the brave new diplomacy in an uncertain world. My question to you is, how do you see diplomacy playing out, especially in context of what we've seen happen recently around our neighborhood, whether it's Pakistan, it's Maldives, it's what's happening in Myanmar, Sri Lanka?
Managing neighborhood is extremely difficult. All big countries have problems with their neighbors. United States has had it for hundreds of years. You see Russia today, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, kind of problems it has with neighbors. But even when to the Soviet Union, so far as Eastern Europe is concerned, China, it has problems with all its neighbors, barring perhaps Cambodia at the moment. One shouldn't exaggerate the idea that India has not been able to manage its neighborhood, because the neighborhood will at a certain level remain unmanageable. These small countries feel very vulnerable towards a big power like India. Even if India is altruistic and generous, they will still distrust India. Because India has the capacity to intervene if it wants to. It can play internal politics in the neighboring countries. So the political class feels insecure. They're always watching out as to which faction India is supporting or not supporting. Even if India is a bit distant from this, as we've seen in the case of Maldives. That's how India's hegemonic, big brother attitude. But the campaign of Muzu, I don't know, funny fellow. What was it about? India out. And he was doing it right under our nose. We let him do it. We said, let domestic politics play, let democracy play in the country, and we will deal with the result. We didn't intervene. In the case of Bangladesh, we haven't intervened, but what has really happened over the years of Hasina government is that a decision was taken by her to intertwine Bangladesh with India at many levels, so that this relationship becomes very difficult to break even if there is a change in government. When I was in office and the BNP government was in power, it was extremely difficult even to talk to them. When I met the BNP leader and called on her, I raised the issue of transit, and she told me quite boldly that this is not a subject she could discuss with me. But look at the situation today. At the same time, the biggest defense partner of Bangladesh is China. China is building a port there. The biggest trade partner of Bangladesh is China, although insofar as India is concerned in South Asia, Bangladesh is our biggest trade partner. In Nepal, they're the most difficult in some senses, because insofar as Pakistan or Bangladesh is concerned, we are aware of the religious divide of the past.
And we know that there are factions, there are lobbies, there are interest groups, which hark back to the reasons why India got partitioned. But Nepal, until recently, was a Hindu kingdom, so we always believed Nepal is like us, but Nepal is not like us. In fact, they're very difficult. They're one of the most difficult neighbors to deal with. And since I served in Nepal, I'm speaking with some degree of knowledge. They played the China card right from the start. In fact, it is the palace that built up the Maoists in order to balance the Nepali Congress. And today you see connectivity, this and that, Oli's policies. There are these forces in Nepal. Sri Lanka, right from the 1956 China rubber agreement with China, has been playing the China card against us. I mean, Hambantota, the Colombo port, and everything else, and the Chinese research ships coming and talking. Again, it's a dual policy. Engage India and also do things which would strengthen ties with India, but at the same time hedge. So if we say to ourselves, look, we want strategic autonomy at a larger international plane because we're a big power. So the small countries may also reason that they want strategic autonomy too. So this is a reality one has to deal with. The only answer is the China factor is there, cannot be overlooked, cannot be, how should I say, combated. Therefore, we should do what we need to do according to our strengths and keep building up those lobbies who are friendly to you and accept the kind of balance that might happen in our neighborhood in this China-India struggle. Though, of course, behind the scenes, at diplomatic levels, one should make very, very clear what our red lines are. The security is very, very important. But then if you have people like Moizu, who wants to not have people get their health care in Dubai and in Thailand and wants to import rice and flour from Turkey, what do you do? What do you do? There it is.
Sir, I have a follow-up question to this. You said, we are dealing with certain difficult neighbors. I know Nepal well. I'm half Nepalese, and there has always been this distrust of India playing Big Brother. But today we see that there's Mandarin being taught in schools. And China has a big footprint. Myanmar also we see is imploding, and 40% of its debt is owed to China. Have we been too cautious in our diplomacy? We've also not played front foot in terms of, some would argue, the Israel-Gaza conflict or even the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We've not played the role of a mediator, and China maybe took that position.
No. I think we've been very wise in adopting a very cautious line, largely of neutrality, political neutrality, but on the humanitarian front. We have given a lot of assistance to Ukraine, as well as to the Gazans, to the Palestine Authority. So the point is, we should not be under the illusion that we have more cards in hand than we actually have. The United States is very, very clear about what it wants to do via Ukraine to Russia. They made it very clear. Isolate Russia, weaken it strategically, militarily make it impossible for Russia to pose a threat in the future, and hopefully regime change, removal of Putin. And they're giving periodically billions worth of arms and financial assistance to Ukraine. In the case of Gaza, the Americans are saying repeatedly, no ceasefire. They see what's happening on the ground, but yet they say no ceasefire, because ceasefire will allow Hamas to regroup. So they're giving time to Netanyahu to finish off his operation in the time frame he has in mind. And very lately he has said he's not going to agree to a two-state solution. Now, in this scenario, what does India do? What does India do? And the greater difficulty is the United Nations is not functional. United Nations Security Council is not functional. United States and the G7 on one side, Russia and China on the other side, there is no meeting ground. So if India injects itself into the thing without any real cards in its hands, we were just going to invite a rebuff. But what we are doing is wise. We are talking to all parties. You've seen Jaishankar has gone to Iran, he's constantly meeting the Americans, Blinken's, he went to Russia, he's gone to the Gulf states. India has now a rising stature, a bigger voice. There is interest in India. Therefore, India's voice is heard with some degree of respect. And countries also want to take into consideration the future of the relations with India. So when India goes and talks and expresses its concern about what's happening in the Red Sea, they just can't be dismissed. Just like other countries do diplomacy with us. And it does leave an impact on us and affects our choices, because we have to make sure that we maintain an even relationship with all parties. Now, other parties also have the same consideration towards India. So I think at the diplomatic level, we are doing very well. We are very proactive. Our foreign minister, I think, is hardly at home. He's traveling all the time. I don't know where he gets his energy, but he has tremendous energy. And he's explaining the rationale, the basis of our foreign policy to all audiences, not with the same kind of defensive mindset as before, but with clarity and a degree of teaching them a few lessons here and there.
Point well taken, sir. Ambassador Dogra, I'd like to come to you now. Pakistan, I think it interests the audience immensely. Utpal in his book has said almost, he said that no dialogue sometimes is the best form of diplomacy, especially maybe with countries like Pakistan. What is your opinion on that, especially, with the fact that the Prime Minister of Pakistan was invited to the swearing-in ceremony, and our Prime Minister also visited Pakistan in the early days?
Bharat is rising, there's no doubt about that. But Bharat will rise even more because of young men and women like you. Because I see a lot of positive energy. I mean, from the time we enter, if you looked left, if you looked right, there was something happening. Whether it was the poetry session here or the bookstores outside. So you inspire confidence and you inspire the feeling that yes, Bharat will continue to rise. On the same theme, I was looking at the book constantly, and dharma, democracy and diplomacy, at another time and age, we would not have included dharma in a book.
Yes.
We were hesitant. We were reluctant to say that, dharma is a part of our life and dharma is a part of our external dialogue. So this is an interesting change and a change done with a lot of finesse, because Utpal's book is also different from books one normally comes across, including mine, because it interlinks the domestic with external. It starts with Khan Market, but then it progresses gently and brings on the change in the external dimension, So it's a smooth flow. The second thing, I'm also envious of Utpal because he has a phenomenal memory. Every second day he quotes me on quotes which I don't remember having ever written.
Maybe he makes them up.
So his 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 reading is phenomenal, and that is why he could have written a 500-page book, but it is well concise and it is to the point on all subjects, including Pakistan. Uh, to be quite honest, Pakistan should not have been there. There was no religious reason, there was no historical reason, there was no cultural reason. But it was imposed because British wanted it to be imposed. And ever since then, Pakistan has not got out of that syndrome that we are there because we have to hurt India one way or the other because it is bigger than us. So that also is part of the earlier question which you asked, Ambassador Sibal, and they give you a wide spectrum on why we have irritation or irritants with the smaller neighbors. Firstly, we can't do anything about our size. And second, the others have not risen as India has risen. Pakistan used to be till early 60s an example for rest of Asia. In fact, I remember Korea having sent a delegation there to study how Pakistan is doing so well. Koreans were not told the real truth because Hindus and Sikhs who were migrating out of Pakistan in 47 had left behind industries, a huge agricultural base, and buildings which are like palaces. And that, I think, contributed to the misfortune of Pakistan. Because unlike here, where, especially in North India, in Punjab especially, our ancestors had to struggle to make a desert bloom again. Because East Punjab was like a desert. It was the West Punjab, which was the granary of the rest of the country, pre-partition country. So we had to struggle on our own, each individual, Sharma, Mehta, or whatever. So they rose from literally the very bottom to wherever they rose as individuals. But it also gave them a set of values, which was missing in Pakistan because the race was between you and me to grab the biggest industry going, grab the best house going. So when you have that mentality, then it is ingrained into your succeeding generations. And that's exactly what happened. One of my favorite quotes, which is not there in the books, was that if you ask a Pakistani, I mean, for example, if you ask me, I'll say I live in such and such place. This is my house number. But when I'm abroad, if they ask, where are you from? I'll say, I'm from India. If you ask a Pakistani, he'll start with the house number. And then when the other person is very insistent, he'll come to the city, state, and finally, very reluctantly, yes, I am from Pakistan. So that, in a roundabout way, I'm answering your question, that is their psychological handicap that they belong to a country which does not know why it should have existed, why it should have come into being. The second, and I think it might shock you, and Utpal has quoted me there, and this is a fact. One minister during my time in Karachi, and this was related to me by a common friend, of that minister and me. He was traveling from Islamabad to Karachi, and he was saying, "Sir, I have to tell you, 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 I have to Karachi or the other way around, and the passenger, who his friend sitting next to him, asked him, "What is your greatest wish in life?" I mean, you become minister, deputy minister of state for foreign affairs. Now, what is your greatest wish in life? He said, "I want 2 atom bombs. One I drop on Bombay at that time, and one in Delhi." So when you have a mentality like that, how do you develop a relationship? So your unanswered question as to why don't we have a dialogue with them, you cannot have a dialogue of the deaf or a dialogue with the people who are not very sure of why they are there.
So I think that was.
Pakistani in the audience?
So then let me bring you to China then. So where do you think we're going with China? You know, can we ever be friends? Some would also argue that China and India have some amount of civilizational, you know, commonalities in terms of they're family-centric, we're family-centric, very arguable. What would you say, sir?
Well, I'll try and answer that, but I think that is a question best addressed by Ambassador Sybil. In my view, and I've written it in wartime, that the next big war in the world, I won't call it Third World War, but the next big war in the world would be between India and China. It will start between India and China. So I think we need to know more about China. And we do not know much about China. Our colleagues, diplomatic colleagues, have written books which are excellent, but still, it is a puzzle. I won't repeat what Churchill said about Russia, Enigma, and so on, but China is the greatest mystery going around in the world because it is not an open society. It is a closed society. So we just make a guess every day that she is a dictator, that she has lost control, that she has enemies, that economy is not doing well. Yet the fact is that this is the second largest economy in the world. And the fact is that the patents issued last year in the world, China had double the amount of patents that USA had. So obviously they're doing something right. There may be some things which are very wrong, starting with the building industry and so on. But something is going the China way, and that should worry us because China wants only one country at the top, starting in, for example, in Asia and then worldwide. And if India wants also to be around the summit, it does not please China. Second, China feels that a new order has to be established in the world. It's not happy with the American-led order. And that again both puzzles us and perplexes us because we don't feel comfortable with an order imposed by an authoritarian state. So China needs to be watched much more closely, much more intensely by us as Indians because more than a Maldives is an irritant, but more than a Maldives, China is going to be the block in our rise.
Sir, as somebody involved in research for a long time, I have to agree with you. You know, the amount of information that we have on China is minimal. We have the least amount of researchers. We know nothing about the functioning of the Politburo as well as the languages, whereas the Chinese CPC members who are focusing on India are fluent in Hindi. You know, so these are the roadblocks I think that we must cross soon. But Ambassador Sybil, I'd like to pose the same question to you.
Well, you know about China Watchers all these years. And when you read them, you felt that they understood China. But at the end of the day, they didn't understand China. So you have a lot of researchers, a lot of expertise, a lot of people studying China, and they've always got China wrong. I mean, I can hardly think of an instance where they got China right. Who has built China? The United States of America and its allies. And on what assumption? That as China rises, becomes economically more advanced, the middle class will grow. The middle class would want political freedoms, and China, therefore, would move towards democracy and would become some kind of a clone of the West, and everything would be hunky-dory. Has it happened? So where is that great expertise of Chinese academics, of American academics, think tanks, China experts, the administration, which took this terribly losing gamble on China, and today they are facing severe competition from China and are treating China as an adversary, and there is a reversal of policy. The question I'm asking, your question I'm answering, that the fact that we don't have enough people studying China, we don't have that kind of an expertise, is just part of the story. You can have a lot of expertise, seeming expertise on China, and yet get China wrong. We've done it. In 1954, we just handed over Tibet to China. We miscalculated what might happen with our so-called forward movement, and we are in 1962. Then Rajiv Gandhi went in 1988 and tried to re-engage China. I had gone with Prime Minister Vajpayee to China in 2002, where we set up the special representatives mechanism. And the logic was that let's forget legalities and history. Let's look at it politically and strategically. I think we felt that since we'd done our nuclear tests, we had more strength and more credibility in terms of dealing with China. Now, I think there have been 22 meetings of the special representatives, and nothing has happened. We had all these 1993, 1996, 2005, 2013 border management agreements. China has violated all of them. Galwan has happened. And now they're making it very clear that we have to live with the present situation on the ground, and there'll be no more concessions from their side. And we have these now troops massed against each other on the border. So therefore, our relationship with China is going to be very difficult. China has the upper hand. Second largest economy in the world, biggest exporting country in the world, controls many modern technologies. We ourselves are dependent on solar panels, APIs, and other things on China, as is the rest of the world. China can't be ignored, no matter, now the narrative has changed. No more. They talk about de-risking now, not decoupling anymore, because the reality is what it is. So we can't ignore the China factor. That's one aspect. The other is that China is sitting on top of us in Tibet. It has militarized Tibet. I ask myself the question, who is threatening Tibet? We agree Tibet is part of China. The Tibetans are a peace-loving people. There's no terrorism. There's no revolt. There is nothing. So why are they militarizing China to the Tibet to the degree that they are? Where is the threat coming from? It's a bit of a question mark. What is their intention? On the other hand, what do they gain by having a serious conflict with China? 1962 can't be repeated. They can make some incremental gains here and there. We'll probably make some incremental gains, but it'll be at those icy heights, which means nothing. And what will happen to the international image of China if they picked up a serious quarrel with India? So I can't see logically why they would want to do that. So their thing is to keep us off balance, keep building Pakistan as a counterweight to us, penetrate our neighborhood, destabilize our relations with our neighbors, have a very active maritime policy where they have ports in various critical areas in the Indian Ocean because they're a big exporting power and an importing power, or their lines of communication trade is through the Indian Ocean. Therefore, they want to dominate the Indian Ocean. Why are they building such a huge navy? First time in history that any country has such rapidly expanded its naval forces. Aircraft carriers, submarines, this and that and that. They can't be confined to the South China Sea. They'll be sitting ducks. So what is the intention? To come into the Indian Ocean. So few years from now, this challenge will get built up insofar as India is concerned. So we have to look ahead and expand our naval forces ourselves. So many decisions will need to be taken, and Quad and everything else is part of the deterrence that we are building towards China. Finally, either China wants to be on the top of the heap, heavenly kingdom and stuff like that, or more realistically, G2. Europe, Atlantic Ocean, America, up till Guam, American. Maybe Central America, but the rest of the world is ours, especially Asia, which is why I land here. We keep saying repeatedly that there has to be multipolarity in Asia. Because if you want to build a multipolar world, you must first of all have multipolarity in Asia, which means recognition of India's strength, of rising India, and India's role in the international community. Big challenge ahead of us.
Sir, I think you'll need to pick up that mic again because my final question of this panel is to you, sir. Utpal makes this very bold statement that, when it comes to the US, we can at the most be friends, maybe we can be frenemies, but we cannot be allies. What is your take on that, sir?
Look at the fate of the allies of the United States of America. Then you have the answer. Number two, can you name, barring the Northern Ireland stuff where the Americans were able to solve the problem, has America been successful in solving any problem, anywhere? Therefore, relying on America beyond a certain point is a self-defeating proposition. America mindset is such that they can only deal with allies who accept American domination. And that is exercised through military means. Now, NATO controls Europe. So, if we want to have a strategic economy, if we want to have a say in global governance, then the current system has to change. But who's dominating the current system? At the center of it is the United States of America. So inherently, despite all that we are doing in terms of coming closer to America, there is a fundamental opposition in terms of the future. Because reform of the UN, our permanent membership, changes in how the economic institutions function, would require a diminution of American power. And America is not going to yield so easily. So there will be this kind of a comfortable balance that has developed today, where we differ on things, but at the same time, both countries feel that in many ways they can reinforce each other, not keeping in mind also the China threat, but not alone. America's own prosperity and growth and technology renewal and everything else. And they see India's potential is the quality of its people. The fact that so many of the top American companies have Indian CEOs has a subliminal effect on that. Here's a people of quality, tremendous brain power and technical capabilities, scientific capabilities. So therefore, ICT and everything else in quantum computing, in robotics and artificial intelligence, everything else, things will happen. So that's the positive part. And the negative part is what you brought out in your book. Because, see, in America, the problem with India is that they are very uncomfortable with the rise of the Indian civilization and the Indian culture. We are a democracy. Therefore, they really don't have an argument to hit us strictly in terms of a democracy. So the way that they do it is indirectly, saying that in India is democratic backsliding, this and that, this and that and that. So that is the way they are found. I heard and then here Blinken speaking at Davos, where he spoke very positively about India and Modi, but spent more time saying that they are constantly discussing human rights and democracy with India. Now, I think they should worry about human rights and democracy in their own country. But there is this, it's very difficult to explain, there is schizophrenia in the United States, frankly.
Thank you, sir. Bharat Rising is, the title of this book is fantastic. Yet, we all have our own individual ideas about what it means of Bharat Rising. My idea would be Bharat Rising over and above its historical fault lines. My idea would be of Bharat Rising over and beyond what we see today as cultural or social or religious differences, while retaining unique identities and rising as one nation, one people. I'd see Bharat Rising and being the balancing power between the East and the West, using its hard power and soft power to the maximum of its potential. But that is just me. I would really like each one of our panelists to say a little bit on this, and I'd like to start with you, Utpal.
I'll just use one line for that. In fact, I don't take much time. Look ahead, but don't cut your civilization route. So that's where your feet should be and your mind should be looking ahead.
I think we are making a political, social, mental transition from India to Bharat. And it has very important implications for our society. Although our constitution says India, that is Bharat, but there are a lot of elements in India at the political and social and religious level which may not be comfortable with the idea of Bharat rising and more comfortable with the idea of India rising. It's a bit like the English language. It's a kind of a thing to which we sort of avoids contentious issues like the imposition of Hindi and this and that, or the North Indians dominating the people in the South and this and that. But we will need this transition. And this has very, very important implications for the future. And I think some of the people you mentioned in the West, they are uncomfortable with this idea. India is familiar territory. Bharat has philosophical roots, cultural roots, civilization roots, pagan roots, if you like. So they're only comfortable with this. But this transition will take place and will change the face, the nature of India, thinking India as a whole, build a tremendous pride in our own civilization and our roots, And if we can change our education system sufficiently to ingrain this idea more deeply, then I think we will be a more complete country.
Well, certainly Bharat is rising and hopefully will continue to rise. And Bharat is rising in multiple ways, multiple dimensions, 22nd being one such. But there's a lot more to be done, and there are a lot more areas to be covered: education, health, infrastructure. So, hopefully, these will be covered in times to come by you people. But we have to keep our fingers crossed because Bharat can rise if the world is not turbulent. Unfortunately, the world does not seem to be very placid at the moment. So let's hope things are good for us, good for the world, so that Bharat can continue to rise.
For me, Rami, I must tell you, my own books, the Bharat series, people ask me that, many of your books are not in what we consider to be Bharat, but I see Bharat as a Vedic arc, an ancient Vedic arc. I mean, it fascinates me that if we go back to 1380 BC, we see two ancient empires, the Mitanni and the Hittites, signing a peace treaty in which they are invoking Varuna, Indra, Mitra. And then you realize the expanse to which, this is Syria and Turkey. Or you come back closer home and you go to China and you realize that, we love our martial arts movies, but at the end of the day, it was one Bodhidharma who went from the Pallava kingdom and took Kalaripayattu and Silambam, which eventually merged into Kung Fu. Go down south and we realized the largest Vishnu temple was not in India but in Angkor Wat. And today also your Thai monarchs are King Rama X. And where do you get the kingdom of Siam? From the complexion of Ram, Shyam. Or the capital city as Ayodhya, which is Ayodhya. So that was the ancient arc. And you can go to country after country after country, and you will see those connections are there. And that is what I think we need to be leveraging on. I think we've done remarkably on the economic front. We are, touch wood, we have such wonderful people on the diplomatic and military front. But we also need to go along and leverage this soft power around the world. And as they say, soft power only works along with economic power and hard power. So I hope that that will happen.
Mr. Sanghi, absolutely agree with you. In Kyoto, the Toji temple, the great Buddha is protected by Vishnu, Brahma, and Maheshwara. But on that note, we are out of time, but we do have questions from the audience, and the organizers have been very kind enough to extend the panel time. So I'd be happy to take not more than 2 questions, please.
Good evening, esteemed panelists. My question is from Ambassador Sibbal. Sir, how can Quad play a crucial role in countering China's attempts at emerging as a hydrocolonial power? Like we see it rapidly building ports in the countries that have fallen in its debt trap.
One shouldn't make too much of the Quad. It is one part of the build-up of deterrence against China. But the Quad is not a military alliance. The Quad doesn't have a substantive economic agenda where they pool their resources and build up their economies together, keeping the China challenge in view. And not only that, in terms of connectivity and other projects, counter the BRI, work together to do that. Quad is not in a position to do that. When it comes to actual military deterrence against China, AUKUS sends a more powerful message. But AUKUS will take, they say, by 2040 or something, Australia will have the wherewithal. So at the moment, yes, the trend is there, but in terms of real military deterrence, it is still the United States of America and its alliance system with Japan and others. If tomorrow there is a Taiwan issue that gets built up, I don't think Quad will have a common policy. Australia, Japan, and United States, yes, they would be together, but India would be hesitant. Our challenge with China at the moment is primarily on the land frontier. And there we don't need anybody's help. Marginal help here and there in terms of building our capacities, but our strength on the ground is being matched in accordance with the China threat. And we'll have to fight this battle on our own. Quad is not going to get involved in this at all. So let's see Quad in the right perspective. Now, in terms of the maritime security is concerned, their Quad is potentially a strong force in the sense that the vulnerability of the lines of communication of the Chinese in the Indian Ocean is something China has to cope with. And the exercise that we're doing with the Americans, and now it has been extended to Japan and Australia, and underwater sea technology, in which we are now having cooperation with the United States, even with France, space capabilities that are being built up in terms of coping with the maritime challenge of China, and there the Quad can have a role.
Hello, sir. The discussion was so interesting that I have developed few questions, and in that I clubbed it into two. The first one is I want to ask it to Utpal sir and Ashwini sir. That belongs to the religious and political dimension, whereas the sir started with that minorities are not threatened in India, whereas we see that many of the minority scholarships such as MANF have been quashed, and we see that minority education is still minority education such as Muslims is still less than that of STs in India. And then we have been a land of Sanatan Dharma. We have absorbed several civilizational thoughts, processes in our country. And now, was we wrong doing that? That today the chant of Jai Sri Ram that came from the hearts have become changed to an instigating chant. And the second question I would like to ask to the ambassadors, where on the foreign policy front, we have seen that we have not been able to align ourselves to the non-alignment movement. Neither we have been able to align ourselves to the American segment or the faction, where we see that Biden has denied Indian invitation to Republic Day Parade. And then we are not being aligned to the China or the so-called Russia-China faction. So it's the need of India to become Atmanirbhar or become a self-power, emerge as a self-power, which we do not see it very closely or being possible very in recent years. And also, you have said, sir has said that Nepal has been the most difficult neighbor to counter or to tackle. And we see that through schemes such as Agnipath, where Nepal has denied sending their troops, Gurkha troops, to join Indian army. And there has been a report that China is trying to attract them into their army. Doesn't this pose a threat to the Indian sovereignty or the Indian hegemonic power that we are trying to become in the recent times? Thank you, sir.
Coming to first question, I believe See, you can quote one data from here, one data from other. And I have a couple of data which say that the numbers have been increased in certain sections for minority students. So I think let's not go there and do to nitpicking just a couple of data here and there. The largely trend is that it's better to take everyone along rather than go into this majority institution. What I remember talking to Arif Muhammad Khan, and he said it's better that we talk like we don't indulge into minoritism per se, and just treat everyone like Indians. That's where everyone should do well. As far as your Jai Sri Ram thing, you said is war cry. Who made that a war cry? That's the question. That was never a war cry. That is never a war cry. And you go to small villages, they still talk about Jai Sri Ram, and they greet each other like that. So that has been done by certain elements. Let's not get too much into that.
I'm going back to my original thesis that in 1947 and eventually 1949, when we adopted the Constitution, our founding fathers of the Constitution did not feel it necessary to incorporate the word secular into the preamble of the Constitution. And what was the reason why they didn't? Does that mean that if you adopted the Constitution in 49 and eventually the word secular came in 1975 or 76, does it imply that for that 25 or 26 years, when you didn't have the word, does it imply that you were a Hindu Rashtra? Had you become a Hindu Rashtra of sorts because you didn't have that word in the preamble? I think the point that our framers of the Constitution were saying is that they understood that the Republic of India, Bharat as it were, was intrinsically plural. And they were looking at plurality as the basis of carrying forward, where there would be equidistance from every religion, from every faith. But did that equidistance actually happen? I mean, honestly speaking, why should the state exchequer have some say or control over 4 lakh Hindu places of worship? The Hindu Charitable Endowments Act, which I think is a 1950s act, took over more than 40 or 50,000 temples of Tamil Nadu. And they had to be pulled up a couple of years ago because more than some 40,000 odd acres of land had gone missing. This is the extent of misappropriation that happens with one particular community's assets. And these were meant to be things that were going to be utilized for the benefit and upliftment of a particular community. So I genuinely believe that if we start finger pointing that this went wrong and this is what you guys said and this is what you have done, then we can be here all night and we'll point fingers at one another.